Thank you so much for attending this event to raise awareness about how we can identify human trafficking so we can respond to it better in our communities and within the legal community. I'd like to thank District Attorney Katz for hosting this event. And I just want to say I value your time, and the fact that you took the time to register and attend alone means you're part of the solution to solving our anti-trafficking problem, our trafficking problem. District Attorney Katz surely needs no introduction, especially in the anti-trafficking space, but I'm just going to introduce her anyway, pointing out some of her incredible accomplishments. DA Katz was elected in 1994 to serve in the New York State Assembly, where she wrote and passed crucial legislation to protect New York's most vulnerable. She authored the Course of Conduct Against a Child law to ensure that predators are held accountable for violating children, and her efforts resulted in the laws tolling the statute of limitations for sexual abuse of a child. Additionally, I had the honor of witnessing her be acknowledged while she was the borough president at the inaction of the sex trafficking of a child law that was signed into effect in 2018. Within her first 6 months as district attorney, she created an exclusive human trafficking bureau here in Queens, the only bureau of its kind in the city, where all the assistants are dedicated solely to prosecuting human trafficking crimes, demonstrating through her leadership her commitment to protect the vulnerable members of our society, and having established this by doing a victim-centered approach to combating human trafficking. District Attorney Katz, would you please?
I thank you, Jessica Milton, and thank you, hold on. Yes. And thank you very much for your expertise, for your willingness to take on the Bureau Chief of Human Trafficking in the Borough of Queens County. It is the first time it's had its own bureau, and you have been an amazing leader in the field. I want to thank the entire Human Trafficking Awareness Panel for the work that they are doing and for the work that we're doing today. There are several people from my office that are on this. I would like to identify them, please. ADA Kiran Chima from the Human Trafficking Bureau, Jessica Santos, who is Director of Crime Victims Advocates Office, Tara Ann Tiles, who's the coordinator at the Office of Immigrant Affairs, and Ronnie Paplani, who is Senior ADA in the Appeals and Special Litigation Division. We also have many of our partners on this call today, because we can't do all of this on our own, clearly. Attacking human trafficking comes from all different agencies throughout the city. Susan Jacob has been an amazing partner at the New York City Family Justice Center. Caroline Hardenball, immigration specialist with Sanctuary for Families. Nathalie Rubio-Torrio, executive director of Voces Latinas, Inc., who I believe Voces Latinas does an amazing job working with the workers, making sure that they know that there are resources and people that truly care about their futures. And I think that's vital to attacking the issues that we are dealing with. And Chandra Wowarunti, Director of Mentari, who also does an amazing job. And I thank you all for coming today. January marks the National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and each of us can help to combat this scourge in our society by knowing how to identify and how to report suspicious activity. And the statistics are really, really troubling. The 2020 Trafficking in Persons report issued by the US Department of State estimates that a staggering 25 million people worldwide are robbed of their freedom and their basic human dignity by sex and labor traffickers. And while trafficking is a very real issue on a global scale, it's also happening right here in our backyards, right here in Queens County. There are an estimated 22,000 victims and survivors across the country, according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline statistics. Although the actual number is feared to be a lot higher than that. It is a crime that is highly underreported. Traffickers often use violence and threats and deceptions and other manipulation in order to force people to engage in commercial sex and to provide labor and services against their will. Home to 2 international airports and to a large number of foreign-born and undocumented persons, Queens County is unfortunately a prime geographical location for trafficking. But this office, this DA's office, is committed to combating this degrading and this criminal industry. And that is why during my first 6 months in office, I created the dedicated Human Trafficking Bureau solely for the purpose of combating human trafficking in Queens County. And we have a very victim-centered approach that helps our victims find the path to freedom. The Bureau aggressively prosecutes traffickers and connects survivors to meaningful services. We do both. It empowers people to escape their abusers. And since the Bureau's formation in June 2020, we've helped half a dozen teenage victims who are being trafficked in Queens County hotels. We helped them exit their traffickers. We helped them with services, and we got them into much better situations so they could take control of their lives. In the past 7 months, we've also obtained 5 separate indictments charging 10 individuals under the sex trafficking statute, all of whom remain, by the way, incarcerated today. The Bureau is led by, like I said, Jessica Melton, and she'll be moderating today's panel. A little bit about ADA Melton, if I can. She's been a prosecutor with the District Attorney's Office for 20 years, since 2007, when New York State's first sex and labor trafficking laws took effect 13 years ago. ADA Melton focused her career solely on the prosecution of human trafficking and related crimes. And many of us know on this Zoom call that these are very, very intense cases and very difficult cases to prosecute. But she never lets up. And that's a great thing about this Bureau. She obtained her first conviction for sex trafficking in New York State and the first labor trafficking conviction in Queens County. And by the way, in 2013, she was awarded the prestigious Thomas Dewey Award. We as an office in ADA Melton, we developed innovative approaches to investigating and prosecuting trafficking offenses. It has been an amazing transition in this office, in the Bureau of Human Trafficking. I do want to thank also Chief Assistant Jen Nyberg, who really leads this office with expertise and does an amazing job in making sure that the priorities of this office are staffed, have the resources they need in order to accomplish what we need to do here, and who brings the entire office together. But ADA Melton, thank you for hosting this today. Thank you for moderating. And to all of the different agencies on this call, or on, I keep saying call, it's a throwback, on this Zoom, we thank you for the work that you do. We thank you for the generations of people that you have helped collectively. And we thank you for being such great partners as we combat human trafficking. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, boss, for that incredible introduction. It means a lot that you entrusted me with this role. I know how important trafficking is near and dear to your heart. Attendees, we have an exciting presentation planned. The first half of our presentation, we will define trafficking. We will talk about where it's occurring in our communities, and we will talk about how we're implementing District Attorney Katz's policies to better address trafficking within the DA's office. The goal of this presentation is to spread awareness to all the attendees that if you know of trafficking, or if you know of a trafficking victim, or if you're an attorney or a service care provider providing services to a trafficking survivor, we want you to know the tools we have here available to assist. And that assistance is available whether or not the individual is choosing to report trafficking at this point in time, and regardless of their immigration status or their gender identity. The second half of this webinar, we will have presentations from an elite number of the many outside organizations and service care providers that we collaborate with to better assist trafficking survivors and those who are commercially exploited, or just those who want to exit the sex trade so that they could be connected with immediate emergency services that they require to arm them with the tools they need to exit their trafficking situation. There is a chat box, so if you do have questions, we're going to try to have some available time at the end, which I believe we will have, to answer some of your questions. So you could type your questions in the chat box. It's been, just because you can't see everyone's questions, we are receiving them. There was a chat box was disabled for visibility due to security purposes. As District Attorney Katz said, the mission of this newly formed Bureau is threefold. Number one, we actively investigate and prosecute the traffickers. We do that because traffickers rarely have only one victim. They are predators and they continue to exploit. And it's important that we hold all those who viciously exploit any person in Queens County accountable. But at the same time, our second mission is to do this in a carefully victim-centered and trauma-informed way, to ensure that we're placing our primary importance on connecting those who are exploited or trafficked with the tools to end their abuse while minimizing any additional trauma from coming through this process. Our doors are open to anyone who is exploited to come and be connected to services at any point in time, or even to discuss, if they wish, their options in reporting, regardless, as I said before, of their gender identity or immigration status. And the third role of the Trafficking Bureau is what we're doing today. We take additional efforts to make outreach, and this outreach is aimed toward increasing our identification of trafficking, which is far underreported. And this outreach also serves to prevent trafficking by educating the community about warning signs and what to look for before trafficking occurs. At the outset, I'm just going to define sex and labor trafficking legally and where it takes place. I will have one of our assistants in the Bureau, Kieran Chima, discuss in more detail child sex trafficking and trends in sex trafficking. Now, when we hear trafficking, what do we think trafficking is? We hear it, we think of the movies, right? We think of people coming from other countries here. We think of people being brought from one state to another. We think of movement. Traffic is movement. But that is not what the law of New York says. That is a form of trafficking. But it's not the only form of trafficking, and it's not the primary form of trafficking we see here in the United States. There's no requirement for any movement across state or international borders for us to establish trafficking. As DA Katz has said time and time before, this can happen equally to foreign-born individuals as well as it can to domestic victims of sex trafficking. It can occur without a victim ever leaving Queens County. Also, it doesn't always take the form of violence, of black eyes and kidnappings or bruises. It can take the form of deep forms of manipulation and fear that traffickers use to maintain power and control. But the one element that we see threaded through all trafficking, the one common thread, is that traffickers target and prey upon the most vulnerable members of our society. They target those who face discrimination or are marginalized in some way. They target those that either face racial discrimination, are economically disadvantaged, persons who face discrimination based on their gender or gender identity. They target people who are marginalized because of their immigration status, because they sometimes have mental health issues, or children. Children are vulnerable in and of themselves, but just because of their age. Children are vulnerable. Who knows a teenager that makes perfect choices? They're always taking risks and testing boundaries. But think about how that risk increases monumentally when one is a product of a group home or foster care system, or has abuse in their family or their social support system. If a child does not feel loved, safe, or stable, they will seek love, safety, and stability elsewhere. And that's how they often fall prey to traffickers. I could take out the penal law book that District Attorney Katz made us sure we were all delivered this week, but I'm going to summarize the laws for you just so you have a general idea with some examples of labor and sex trafficking. Sex trafficking, generally, the law took effect in 2007. It's under penal law section 135.35 is labor trafficking, if anyone does care to look it up. It's basically using force, fraud, or coercion to make someone work or provide services. Force, fraud, and coercion. And that's the same for sex trafficking too, and we'll discuss the examples. It can be performed by, it can be output by requiring that labor be performed to repay a debt that the trafficker has caused. So we see this often when someone is, their passage to the United States is paid for by the trafficker, or even within states is paid for by the trafficker. And then when the trafficker gets here, there's a debt owed for that transport, and that transport, and they make the trafficker work doing any form of work. It can be had by withholding government identification documents to impair their freedom of movement. We often see foreign-born individuals come to the United States, and their employer says, you know what, you don't want to hold that passport on you. You can get robbed. It could get lost. Let me put that in the safe for you, and I'll hold it. And then they never see their passport again, and they use their immigration status to make them continue to work. And it can also be done by force, by instilling a fear of physical injury, damage to property, unlawful imprisonment, arrest, deportation, or ridicule. That's labor trafficking. That is a D felony. Sex trafficking is under Penal Law Section 230-34, if anybody cares to look it up. And it's force, fraud, or coercion to compel or induce a person to engage in prostitution acts. And I will leave the sex trafficking of a child explanation to my colleague, Ada Chima, after we're done talking about general sex trafficking. Sex trafficking can occur in a multitude of situations. The law is very carefully laid out. It can be done with providing drugs, narcotics to impair a person's judgment. It could be happen by making misstatements or false statements to induce them to continue to engaging in prostitution acts. It could be held also by withholding or confiscating any government identification to impair their freedom of movement. And it can also be done by requiring that prostitution be performed to repay either a real or purported debt. This could be as huge, as we said, as passage from another country, or as small as buying an individual new clothes and getting her hair and nails done and getting a hotel room, and then say, you know what, you think all this was free? Now you owe me. And oftentimes this debt continues to add up and is insurmountable. And it also can be done by engaging in any scheme, plan, or pattern to compel another person through fear of physical injury, damage to their property, or exposing a secret or publicizing a fact that would subject someone to ridicule. We see this often with traffickers taking naked pictures of a victim and then saying, you know, do you want this disseminated on social media? No, then you're going to have to work for me. Do you want me to show your mom that you are in a prostitution advertisement? And you'd be surprised how many children continue to be exploited with this threat and fear of just their engaging in prostitution being disclosed to the people that they care about. Where do we see trafficking in Queens? We see labor trafficking everywhere. Labor trafficking occurs in domestic service, grocery stores, construction and landscape businesses, hotels, beauty industries. We don't see as much agriculture in the city, but it's also a large area where people are labor trafficked. It's also seen in manufacturing. It's all over. There's no industry that is immune to labor trafficking. And because these are legal industries, it's even more difficult for us to identify as community members. And we'll talk about challenges a little bit later. Sex trafficking we see occurs in massage parlors, brothels, hotels, motels, street level prostitution, and internet advertised prostitution. Now, we also have a relatively newly enacted section of the penal law, which is sex trafficking of a child, that took effect a couple of years ago. And I'm going to leave Assistant District Attorney Kieran Chima to talk about that and her work. But first, I'm going to introduce her so you know who she is while she's speaking to you. Assistant District Attorney Kieran Chima was born and raised in Flushing, Queens. She's a graduate of New York University and Columbia Law School. Ada Chima began her service as an assistant district attorney in 2015 and has worked on human trafficking investigations and prosecutions for the last 4 years. Most notably, she obtained a jury trial conviction against a trafficker for trafficking a teenage girl who was growing up in the foster care system. Our last trial before the pandemic, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She was assigned by District Attorney Melinda Katz, thankfully, as an Assistant District Attorney in the newly formed Human Trafficking Bureau in 2020. She is a rising star in our office. Kieran, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, District Attorney Katz, and thank you for that introduction, Jessica. I'm going to be talking about sex trafficking of a child today. In late 2018, the legislature amended the penal law to add a new section, Penal Law 230-34A, sex trafficking of a child. This crime is a B violent felony, and the law states that a person is guilty of sex trafficking of a child when he or she, being 21 years old or more, intentionally advances or profits from prostitution of another person, and such person is a child less than 18 years old. Prior to that law, we were able to charge, indict, and convict traffickers under two different laws. One of those laws is promoting prostitution in the second degree, which makes it a crime to advance or profit from the prostitution of a person less than 18 years old. But promoting prostitution in the second degree is a C nonviolent felony, which means it carries lesser penalties, and a trafficker who is convicted of that crime is not designated as a violent felon. We were also able to charge traffickers under several theories enumerated in Penal Law 230-34, sex trafficking, as Jessica just explained. And sex trafficking is a B nonviolent or a B violent felony, depending on which theory we were working under and charged a trafficker with. But under sex trafficking, in order to prosecute someone, we needed to show an element of force, fraud, or coercion. And this was true whether the survivor victim was a child or an adult. New York state law prior to 2018 made no distinction between child and adult victims as it related to sex trafficking. But now, with sex trafficking of a child on the books, we no longer need to prove those elements of force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to child victims, and it allows us to seek justice for all survivor victims who are children. We simply need to show that the trafficker is 21 or more, that the survivor victim is less than 18, and that the trafficker intentionally advanced or profited from the victim's prostitution. And now, New York state law is more in line with federal law and other anti-trafficking legislation in New York, like the Trafficking Victims Protection and Justice Act. And the significance of this law has been huge in that it's enabled us to more effectively prosecute traffickers who target and exploit children for their own commercial gain. And that's because not every survivor victim will self-identify as a victim, nor will they necessarily allege force, fraud, or coercion at the outset. In our experience, the survivor victims we've met with have an emotional attachment to their traffickers and oftentimes view their traffickers as romantic partners. Certainly, this relates to trauma and the control that these traffickers have exerted over their victims. So it's important for us to be victim-centered and let them disclose that if and when they feel comfortable. When a survivor victim meets with us, we're focused on making sure that their immediate needs are being met. For example, oftentimes traffickers take and keep their victim's identification. So when we meet with a victim, we're focused on getting them that identification. Or if they're in need of housing placement, we try to connect them with service providers. But because trafficking is at its core an economically driven crime, it's also important that we're able to charge these traffickers and they're not exploiting other child victims. Also, for a number of reasons, many survivor victims leave their traffickers but return to them at a later point. In court, these traffickers have tried to use those facts to argue that their victims were not coerced, they were not forced, but that they were there out of their own free will. And we know that that's simply not the case, and that it's oftentimes due to the traffickers' coercion, manipulation, and the fear that they've instilled in their victims. Luckily for us, facts like that haven't been fatal in the past to holding traffickers accountable. We have been successful in defeating those arguments by demonstrating the traffickers' control over their victims, but that may not always be the case. So it's absolutely essential that we have other legal means of holding the traffickers accountable. I want to briefly talk about the recruitment and grooming process of these youths. How are traffickers meeting their victims, and how are they setting the stage for their victims to engage in prostitution for the traffickers' commercial gain? More and more, we're seeing Facebook and social media as a way of initial introductions. After meeting on Facebook, the trafficker can set up a meeting in person. And oftentimes by this point, the trafficker has established some sort of emotional connection with the victim. The trafficker introduces the victim to a new setting, buys the victim clothes, a phone, food. They drive them around in a rental car, and oftentimes they stay in hotels. And after meeting in person, the trafficker may also begin to have sex with the victim, which is why oftentimes traffickers are also charged with statutory rape, if not forcible rape. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of the times victims who have met these traffickers have already faced their own challenges in life. Many of them live in a foster home or a group home or a residential treatment facility, or are just children whose basic emotional or psychological needs aren't being met, and the traffickers are keyed into that. These victims have been abused in the past. They do not have tremendous socioeconomic support systems. And now they're being introduced into a new life that offers false promises of filling those needs, a new life that often involves drugs and alcohol, which also impairs their own decision-making. And there's also clearly an age imbalance between a child victim and an adult trafficker. So it's not surprising to see that traffickers know who they are targeting. So now the trafficker has laid the groundwork to introduce prostitution to their victim, to get their victim to start engaging in sex acts. Sometimes there's violence involved at this stage. Or they manipulate their victims into thinking that it's just another way to make money, that they're a team and prostitution is a way to make money for the team. Other times, there are multiple victims who are manipulated and pitted against each other by the traffickers. But they obscure what it actually entails and how traumatic it will be for the victim. And so what we've seen is that the victim ends up in a position where they want to stop, but cannot stop because of the trauma bonding that's occurring. And victims also don't want to get into detail about what they were subjected to because they don't want anything bad to happen to their traffickers. And that's why it's so important that we do not have to initially allege any force, fraud, or coercion in these cases involving child victims, and that we are still able to charge the trafficker. I wish I can get into more detail, but I hope that this has been informative, and I look forward to hearing from our other panelists. Thank you.
Jess, you're on mute. Jessica, please unmute your mic.
Jessica, you're on mute. Jessica, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, boss. We 23034A is the sex trafficking of a child statute. We had a question in the chat, and I think the message went through before I was finished. We're going to take some time in a moment to present to you how District Attorney Katz is using her leadership to combat trafficking, not only by the creation of the Bureau, but by fostering collaboration with other areas of her office and different units in the office to make sure that we're giving all trafficking victims and survivors the tools they need to become economically independent. But before that, I'm just going to give the floor to the District Attorney Katz so she can say something to you.
Right, I apologize that I can't be on this webinar for the entire time. I just wanted to exit by saying actually just that, which is that we have a large office with many resources. One of the things that I tried to do when I immediately came in on January 1st was to make sure that these offices were working together. We had different bureaus doing different things in different times on same cases sometimes. And the value of talking to one another and the value of combining the efforts of the different bureaus, I think has been a priceless addition to the success of the mission of this office. So I thank you, Jessica, for pointing that out. I did want to reiterate one specific thing, though. You know, Jessica keeps talking about regardless of gender identification or documentation status. I can't stress that enough. For the different agencies and not-for-profits that you are working with, for the different governmental agencies that you are working with, for all of the people that come to talk with you and want advice on how to move forward on their individual cases, or for their family members that are being affected by human trafficking. Documented, undocumented, any status, it is not an issue to us. We want to help you. We want to make sure that you are not victimized. We want to get you the services to make sure that your life goes on the trail and the path that you choose it to go on. And we want to open the door of opportunities. So we cannot stress that enough. And I guess I stress that so much because we are the borough of Queens County. We are 190 countries and 190 countries and 200 languages. We have that diversity here in Queens where we want to make sure that all the constituents, everyone here feels safe and feels that this is a bureau that they can come to for help, no matter what their situation is outside of the trafficking. So we thank you, and I thank you again, Jessica, for your attention.
Thank you, boss. And thank you, Kieran, again. So just following up on a few things Kieran said, that is why we have so many challenges in prosecuting human trafficking cases. It's a huge form of trauma bonding where victims are emotionally attached. Also, not many people self-identify as a trafficking victim. A lot of victims of trafficking, especially labor trafficking, might not be aware that they're a labor trafficking victim. They might not be aware of the laws of our country, or maybe because of natural self-preservation or survival mechanism, people don't want to accept that they are victims. They don't want to be victimized. And also, traffickers place an inordinate amount of fear in victims. That's why they target these vulnerabilities. They tell victims, listen, you don't like what I'm doing to you? Go to the police. And see what they do. They're going to deport you because you don't have any identification. They're going to arrest you because you haven't been paying taxes for your work. And this is an incredible fear that is built up. And because of these challenges, we need to dispel these myths, as District Attorney Katz said, and let everyone know our doors are open. And because of these challenges, we're seeing many trafficking victims come through the court system, either as victims of less severe crimes, as witnesses, and sometimes even as criminal defendants. And it's up to us to ask the right questions. And that's why we're having this webinar today, just to raise more awareness. So now that we've gotten through what trafficking is and where it's occurring, I'm going to talk to you about what the district attorney is doing to foster greater support in this area. One area we provide support to trafficking survivors is we assist by, excuse me, I'm going a little out of order. Let's think about what it's like to be a trafficking victim. One area which the district attorney has focused a lot of attention here is on our victim services unit, which is run by Jessica Santos, the director of the Crimes Victims Advocate Program. Think about this. How many people wake up, find that they're a victim of a crime and say, wow, I can't wait to get to the police station and report this? Or I can't wait to meet the district attorney's office. I hear prosecutors are such interesting, fun people. I can't wait to walk in there and meet somebody new and interesting. Adults don't feel this way. Now think about how that is for someone who's a victim of severe sexual trauma. So we have support within our office of trauma-informed care. And I'd like to introduce Jessica Santos. She was newly appointed by District Attorney Katz as the director of the Crime Victims Advocates Office. And I can personally say, during the challenges we faced during COVID, Jessica has stepped up above and beyond to assist in this area. Jessica is a licensed marriage and family therapist with 10 years experience working on the social services field. She received her bachelor's in psychology at Andrews University and her master's in marital and family therapy from Loma Linda University. Early in her career, she worked with children connected to the child welfare system and reunification of families from all walks of life. She later provided trauma-informed care and services to unaccompanied minors from Latin America as a clinician, as an assistant director. Ms. Santos has a strong passion for serving the community and for providing trauma-informed care. Jessica, would you please tell the attendees, talk about the work that we're doing to provide support and services within our office?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Today, I'll describe our services and how we help support our human trafficking survivors. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm the director of the Crime Victims Advocate Program here at the Queens District Attorney's Office. Our program, for the most part, is to create a safe space for all survivors to be heard and supported throughout their criminal justice system process. Typically, our initial contact with survivors are via a phone call or collaborative meetings with the assigned ADA. We also reach out to survivors via letters detailing our services and their rights as crime victims. Our team of advocates are comprised of master's level social workers and an advocate with over 15 years of experience within CBAP. Our team of therapists provide emotional support and assess for PTSD symptoms. They're also knowledgeable in crisis intervention and assessing for suicidal ideation. This can determine if referrals to mental health or psychiatric care are fitting. Within our group of advocates, we also have fluency in Bengali and Spanish. We also utilize the language line for any other language that we may need assistance with. Our role overall is to assess, provide support, and when appropriate, refer to additional resources. Our entire team is prepared to assist a survivor's access to services and aid in the survivor's healing process. Our work with human trafficking survivors includes providing assistance with safety planning, transportation, moving expenses, compensation for essential personal property, connection to permanent housing, treatment programs, and mental health services. We help in completing NYCHA emergency transfers and Section 8 applications to mobilize our survivors out of harm's way. Our advocates also work with agencies like Breaking Ground, Volunteers of America, and the Queens Family Justice Center to provide access to emergency shelters. We understand that access to permanent housing can be vital in liberating a survivor from an unsafe environment. We also have provided tangible items such as weighted support bears, which you can see behind me, and guided journals and other stress-inducing items to help minimize anxiety related to participating in court proceedings. Our program also provides support in writing victim impact statements. As we know, it is difficult to put into words the harm caused. Advocates attend trial with survivors and provide caring guidance every step of the way. Our advocates also have access to VINE, which stands for Victim Information Notification Every Day. This system provides real-time updates via phone or text of any changes in the offender's custody status. By enrolling in this notification system, it allows the survivor to feel empowered and proactively plan for their safety. With the assistance of the Office of Victim Services, we can assist in compensation for medical and psychological counseling expenses. Our team has also coordinated with doctors and physicians regarding long-term care at treatment facilities for survivors. The Crime Victim Advocate Program is committed to providing professional services to survivors as well as their families. We are here to help you. Our team is comprised of compassionate staff who are ready to support you in any way that we can. Thank you for having me today. I can answer questions at the end of today's panel, or our information would also be shared in the chat box if you ever need to contact us. Thank you so much for having me today. I will give it back to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica, and for all
Thank
your
you.
work and for joining us today. The next speaker we have on the panel is Tara Ann Tiles. One of the areas we provide support to trafficking survivors is to assist them in filing applications to maintain legal status in the United States. It is called T visas and U visas. No one who comes into the contact of the district attorney's office and reports any type of trafficking is reported to immigration authorities. As the district attorney said, if we have one takeaway from that, that's what we want you to take away. To the contrary, we are working very hard to make sure that everyone is connected with supportive immigration legal services. And that's what Tara Ann Tiles is going to talk about. She's the coordinator of the Office of Immigrant Affairs. She's been with the Queens District Attorney's Office for 21 years. Tara has worked in our trial division, investigations division, and for the past 6 years in our community partnership division. Tara Ann is the contact person for all UNT visa certification requests and information from our office. Tara, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. It's my pleasure to be here. So first, I'm going to speak a little bit about what OIA does for the Queens DA's office. I'll briefly explain what a UNT visa is and how we work and partner with all the bureaus, but specifically the human trafficking. So the Office of Immigrant Affairs was created in 2015. We were created to help all victims of crime, regardless of your immigration status, religion, gender identity, or language spoken. Within the Office of Immigrant Affairs, we have staff that speaks Chinese, the Mandarin dialect, Korean, Spanish, and English. When need be, we will use a language line like the crime advocate will. We also go out to the community to let the Queens community know their rights. We will do presentations at churches, mosques, synagogues, schools. We hit all the festivals, street fairs, name it, we are there to let this community know their rights and know they do not have to be afraid to come forward if they are a victim. We are here to help you. So let's talk a little bit about UNT visas. So just so we're clear, we are a certifying agency of the supplemental B certification of the U visa and the T visa. The actual U visa and T visa is granted by the federal government, but you need that supplemental B in order to apply. We actually were the first DA's office to issue on open cases for U and T visas. The U visa has specific crimes on it, but as a trafficking victim, it has a section that you can check off for trafficking, whereas the T visa is specifically for a trafficking victim. So you qualify for both. I am the contact person for all UNT visas. My information, as well as the Office of Immigrant Affairs hotline, is going to be put into the chat information. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. You can contact me about how officially requesting a UNT visa from our office, and you will get an answer within 24 to 48 hours. As our partners here can tell you, I'm an early bird, so I will answer you and I will let you know what the office requires in order to officially request one. So if you have any questions, you can, I'll be here to answer them at the end of the panel. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Tara. And make sure you also CC the Human Trafficking Bureau when you're making those requests, because as the district attorney said, she fosters collaboration. So we can all make sure we're addressing this in the most trauma-informed way that we can. Our next panelist from the district attorney's office is Ronnie Paplani. As many of you may know or may not know, many victims of trafficking end up with criminal convictions that they've incurred during the course of their trafficking. And these convictions could be for prostitution, they could be for convictions related to the prostitution dates they were going on during the course of their trafficking, and they follow them and they inhibit their ability to be eligible for certain employment. And there are remedies we now, DA-CATS is utilizing in a greater way to address these issues for trafficking survivors. through vacating some of their convictions. And since the creation of the Human Trafficking Bureau, she's increased our involvement with that process in a victim-centered way. So now this is probably our greatest legal expert on our legal panel is Rani Paplani. She's a Queens Senior Assistant District Attorney. She was born in Bombay, India, and grew up in New York City. A graduate of Duke University and Georgetown University Law School, she has extensive major felony trial experience in Queens County and a significant appellate experience in New York State and federal courts. ADI Paplani specializes in state and federal post-conviction litigation, post-conviction human trafficking vacatur motions, and has extensive experience in special victims cases, which is sex crimes, child abuse, domestic violence, all other major felony prosecutions. She supervises and trains junior prosecutors in written and oral advocacy in appellate and trial courts. Rani, can you please explain the process?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you all for being here today. I am going to talk about that process of vacatur. As Jessica said, so many of the survivors do have these criminal convictions that are largely for prostitution, loitering for prostitution, and similar offenses. And aside from the stigma associated with these convictions for the survivor, they have very real world consequences, as Jessica said, often preventing them from getting jobs, keeping jobs, getting an apartment, and achieving the financial independence that a survivor needs in order to re-enter society and rebuild life after breaking free from a trafficking situation. With that in mind, in 2010, the New York legislature passed a law permitting survivors to vacate, and I'll define that term in a minute for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, to vacate certain criminal convictions based on their having been a victim of human or sex trafficking as defined by various provisions of the state and federal law. So what is vacatur? Vacatur is when a conviction, a criminal conviction, is set aside, removed, vacated. The criminal procedure law specific section for this is 44010 sub 1 sub I. It was an existing vacatur statute that this subdivision was added to. And in fact, New York State was the first state in the country to enact this sort of legislation. And I believe at this point, most states have followed suit, with an exception for a handful. But what is that process here in New York? How does that happen? So the survivor's attorney files a motion with the court and with the DA's office seeking vacatur under this statute. We receive those motions at the Appeals and Special Litigation Division. Our goal and expectation when we receive those motions is that we are going to consent to the motion to get that survivor the relief that she needs. To do so, we conduct an investigation, which is always a collaborative effort between not only our bureau, but our Human Trafficking Bureau and the DA's office, and any other victim advocate agency that might be involved in a particular case. In addition, and critically, we collaborate with the survivor's attorney and the survivor herself during the investigation process so that we can gather as much information as we can to paint a large picture and get to the goal of consent. In fact, sometimes this collaboration with the survivor and her attorney happens before the formal motion is actually filed. Often we'll receive a phone call from an attorney saying, my client, the survivor, is afraid of this aspect of the process. Is there something we can do to address that sort of concern? And we'll work with the attorney to get the survivor to the point where she's comfortable going through this vacatur process with the motions that are filed. There's a very high degree of trust and respect for confidentiality between us and the survivor's attorney. There are times, rare instances, where we would like to meet the survivor and conduct a personal interview to get that additional information that we want. All of those interviews are conducted in a non-intrusive environment, and they're either conducted by or supervised by somebody who has extensive trauma-informed interviewing skills, understands the nature of human trafficking dynamics, and is well aware of the physical, psychological, and emotional trauma that the survivor has endured to get to that point of coming to court and filing a motion. Just so you know, a court always has a discretion to maintain a survivor's anonymity in a motion. So very often those motions are filed just using the survivor's initials to maintain that confidentiality and make the survivor feel more comfortable with this process. What happens at the end of the process when we actually have all of our information in order to file our response to the motion? As I said before, our goal is always to consent to the motion, and we're going to try to gather as much information as we can to do that. When we have that information and we're ready to consent, we file our motion papers with the court. We do not include the details that we've gleaned from our investigation because of our high degree of confidentiality. It's a very legal document that just sets forth the legal standard and the fact that we've conducted this investigation and we're satisfied. Most of the motions in this regard are filed with the Human Trafficking Intervention Court. So at the judicial level too, there's a deep understanding of the dynamics of human trafficking and what the survivor has endured to get to this point. When we consent to a motion, there's very, very little chance that a court is going to deny it. I've never seen that happen. So once the court grants the motion, what does that mean? It means that the conviction is gone. It's vacated. And after that, it gets dismissed and sealed so that in effect, it's erased from the survivor's criminal rap sheet and she can go forward. One of the nice things about this is that in my experience, even before COVID, when we were still going to court, the court never really required a survivor, to appear in court to receive this decision. Again, confidentiality and understanding the nature of a survivor's experience. Some survivors do want to come to court to partake in that momentous moment where her criminal convictions are vacated and they like to be there, but that's really her choice. And like I said, in my experience, it isn't required and probably won't be once we resume in-person operations. That is pretty much it. It's a very easy, streamlined, simple process to attain vacator. And I think the important thing for the community to know is that this procedure is available and it's always done with an eye toward consenting to the motions. And our goal is to do that and help the survivor reach her goal. And we do it in collaboration with all the different agencies. So thank you very much.
Ronnie, can you stay on one moment? I'm going to answer, Ronnie.
Yeah.
Just stay on one moment because I'm going to answer a question, but I want maybe you to chime in if I'm not 100%
Sure.
accurate. Ms. Roska asked what happens to criminal convictions that are not for prostitution, but other crimes related to prostitution offenses. And I just explained to her, I said I was going to answer live, but that just this week, the district attorney has actually consented to vacatur of a conviction involving a felony, a drug sale, where the trafficker was forcing the trafficking victim to sell drugs on prostitution dates. So we do investigate in the interest of justice other crimes if there are other crimes that were committed over the course of trafficking that is not necessarily just prostitution. Is that correct, Ronnie?
That's entirely correct. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you again, Ronnie. That was really informative. Human trafficking is not a problem. Now that we've heard from everyone, the panelists in the district attorney's office, it's not a problem that one office can address alone. And recognizing this, the DA has fostered close relationships and collaborations with other agencies and service care providers who have connection with the community to assist us, but more importantly, to make sure any trafficking victim we come into contact with is connected to the appropriate services that are accessible for them. This could be housing, counseling, medical care, legal advice, peer support, or even substance abuse or economic empowerment programs. And in terms of our service partnerships, I just want to thank the incredible lineup of experts here today. Whoever joined, you did not waste your time. These are only a handful of the resources we collaborate with, but these are all exceptional exceptional people in their work. And I just want to thank them for their time. I can't believe we got them all on one day. First, I want to introduce Susan Jacobs, who through the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence facilitates a wealth of services to trafficking survivors through the Family Justice Center in Queens County. Susan Jacobs is a staff person for the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence and the executive director for the New York City Family Justice Center, the Queens FJC. She's been working at the FJC in various administrative capacities since 2008. Prior to her position with the Mayor's Office, Susan worked in the HIV/AIDS field for over 10 years in New York City and India. Susan worked on the prevention of mother-to-child HIV/AIDS transmissions in Bombay and transitioning HIV-positive youth to healthy adulthood. Susan started her career at the Asian Pacific Islanders Coalition on HIV/AIDS, where she managed the Centers for Disease Control, founded by HIV counseling, testing, and referral programs, working with high-risk communities. Susan, can you please share with our attendees the resources that you have available for trafficking survivors at the FJC?
Absolutely, thank you. I would like to begin by thanking Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz. Thank you so much for inviting me to today's very special event. I would also like to thank Jessica Melton for all the incredible work she does to protect survivors each day. She works tirelessly to ensure safety of the survivors of human trafficking. I am honored to join you and today's amazing panelists. So since March 18, when our Family Justice Centers pivoted to remote model, NGBV has provided services to over 22,000 clients, including over 10,000 new clients. The New York City Family Justice Center provides free and confidential assistance for victims and survivors of domestic and gender-based violence, which can include sexual violence, human trafficking, stalking, and intimate partner violence. All centers are remote, and we are answering live calls from Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I know the numbers will be given out as well as additional city resources, including the 24-hour domestic violence hotline, which is 1-800-621-HOPE. And of course, survivors with access to the internet can visit newyorkcity.gov/NewYorkCityHope. So at any of the Family Justice Centers, survivors of domestic and gender-based violence and their children can get connected to organizations that provide case management, economic empowerment, counseling, civil legal, and criminal legal assistance. We're located in all 5 boroughs, and FJCs are safe, caring environments that provide one-stop services and support. Key city agencies, community, social, and civil legal service providers, and the District Attorney's Office are co-located at the FJC to make it easier for survivors to get help. Also, survivors do not need to be involved with law enforcement to utilize any of our FJC services. All are welcome regardless of language, income, gender identity, or immigration status. And of course, interpretation services are available at every single FJC. We also use survivor-centered approach. This approach stresses that empowerment of the person, offering choices and respecting their choices is the most effective means of meeting their needs and goals. Staff also emphasize providing services that are voluntary, non-judgmental, culturally and linguistically appropriate, that are informed by the priorities and concerns of the client. And of course, Queens Family Justice Center partners and work with the fellow panelists that are here with us today. And we have a total of about 25 on-site Queens Family Justice Center partners, and we rely on everyone when we are working with trafficking survivors. A few of the agencies that I want to highlight, which specialize with trafficking survivors, is Restore, and they provide services, including trafficking identification, which is so important. And they work with human trafficking survivors over the age of 18. We also have Women's Prison Association, and the Women's Prison Association programming provides advocacy and case management support for women with past or present systems involvement. We also have Korean American Family Service Center, and their services are specializing in Flushing. We also have Mount Sinai, Savi, and of course, Sanctuary Families. And I know my colleague Caroline Hardenball will be discussing their program shortly. These partnerships are so essential. I know that the panelists spoke a little bit about this, but often survivors do not identify themselves as being abused for a variety of reasons, including shame, fear of stigma by their community. So collaboration is key because we cannot do this work alone. We just recently had a case of a remarkable 21-year-old woman whose trafficker was also trafficking minors, and the survivor did not identify as being trafficked. And for the variety of reasons that were just mentioned, including trauma bonding. And she has extensive history of trauma from being abused by a family member, and met this trafficker who moved her from various different states. We were all able to work together to help gain her trust, getting this client to a shelter. And she is also getting intensive services, including counseling through Restore. It has been a tough road for her, but she is doing remarkably well because she has a group of people providing her support. So this kind of collaboration and partnership is so crucial. The city is here for survivors, and we will continue to work to identify best practices and innovative approaches to enhance its services. Survivors need us more than ever in these extraordinary times, and our top priority remains to ensure ongoing services and unwavering support. Together, we can tell survivors that they are not alone, they are never alone, and help is there for them. And I thank you. And I will be available to answer any questions that you have. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Susan, for all your work. And gearing right into the Family Justice Center, our next speaker representing Sanctuary for Families is Caroline Hardenball. And I think we might have gotten her on her first or second day working at the Queens location. We routinely work with Sanctuary for Families to get victims of both domestic trafficking and foreign-born help with housing assistance, from housing assistance and counseling to even obtaining legal immigration status. Caroline's the newest addition, and we are very fortunate to have her as a resource right here in Queens. She is an immigration specialist at Sanctuary for Families, working out of the Mayor's Office's Queens Family Justice Center. Previously, she worked as a manager of strategic partnerships and programming at New Women's New Yorkers, and held various interim positions at the New York Immigration Coalition and the Urban Justice Center. Before that, she worked for over 15 years at Sanctuary for Families, building their immigration intervention project. With over 20 years of direct service experience representing immigrant survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking in New York City metropolitan area, Caroline has helped countless immigrant survivors secure permanent status in the United States. Strongly believing in the transformative power of a holistic and client-centered services, a particular focus of hers has been to ensure that immigrant New Yorkers enjoy equal and easy access to free and high-quality information, opportunities, and legal representation. Born into a family of civil engineers and educators, Caroline is a connector and a builder, proud of the bridges she has helped build between immigrant survivors and the New York legal community, inspiring attorneys and law students to share their expertise and skills in the service of others. A native of the Netherlands, Caroline received her academic legal training at University of Leiden School of Law. She also studied at the Universidad Iberoamerica in Mexico City. She is co-founder of the United Immigrants of New York, producing informational videos in Spanish for Spanish-speaking immigrant communities. She's also on the Immigration Advisory Panel Coordinator for the LGBT Bar Association of Greater New York, and is on the board of Voices Latinas and Two Later. Caroline speaks 5 languages, including Spanish and French. Thank you for being with us today, Caroline. We're so happy to have you in Queens as a resource. Will you please share with the attendees the work that you do?
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I'm grateful to District Attorney, to you, Jessica, and to Tara Ann, and all of your colleagues at the DA's office for your leadership. A huge thank you for all speakers and all attendees for all you do to end human trafficking as well. The cycle of buying and selling other human beings for financial gain. Most of all, thank you for doing justice by survivors. Sometimes that's completely transforming a life, but it can also mean just planting a tiny seed. And even that makes a huge difference. If leaving a domestic violence abuser takes 7 attempts, that's what they say, imagine leaving a trafficker. As a survivor service community, we need to make sure that we always do our best so that our clients overcome their fear and can make informed decisions for themselves. You can start with just a few simple questions. Have you eaten yet? What can I do for you? How can I help? And then just listen and take it from there. Validating a survivor's experiences is not just powerful, but it's absolutely crucial to build a relationship of trust. So you just heard my whole long bio, and I'm sorry for bearing with me, but I work at Sanctuary for Families out of the Queens Family Justice Center, which, as you just heard, is one of the city's 5 collaborative client service centers to help people who experience gender-based violence and trafficking find the help they need. It's truly an incredible place. Sanctuary for Families offers holistic and comprehensive legal, social, economic empowerment and shelter services to survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking as well. Over the years, I've worked with many immigrant survivors of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and yes, also organ trafficking, helping them secure permanent immigration status, work permits, a social security number, all very important tools for a future with more options. Tara Ann already spoke about UNT visas, remedies for trafficking survivors involved in an investigation or prosecution of their trafficker. But there are other common humanitarian immigration options as well for survivors. They include special immigrant juvenile status for non-citizen survivors under 21, Violence Against Women Act self-petitions for those who maybe are married to a US citizen and lawful permanent resident, because we see that as well, especially in labor trafficking cases, but also in sex trafficking cases. And then there's, of course, asylum for survivors who fear severe harm or death upon their return to their home country. Time is too short right now to explain all of these different remedies in detail, but please remember that they're real remedies with real outcomes. So please refer each survivor for a detailed quality legal consultation. And don't wait to do this, as many immigration cases, and especially these days, have very strict filing deadlines. By the way, referring your client for a consultation, which is like a comprehensive orientation about their rights and options and risks, does not mean, and it's been said before, does not mean also reporting their abuser or trafficker for arrest or prosecution. That's just one of the possibilities that can be explored. And I cannot stress that enough. It's not just the services community that assists survivors. The Queens DA's office has done incredible work helping them find safety and stability, and also secure immigration status. We just spoke about the UNT certifications, and I think Queens definitely is a leader also in issuing these, changing even more lives than the certifications they sign when you really think about each case also often including multiple dependent family members in the US and abroad. They've advocated for survivors to get something that's called continued presence, or CP, which is a temporary immigration status and a work permit in periods of 1 year for survivors collaborating in a trafficking investigation. By the way, if such an investigation happens, our clients do not go into those meetings with law enforcement on their own, but we provide them with what we call witness cooperation services. Again, that has to do with the relationship of trust that we try our best to build with all our clients. And lastly, as you already heard Ronnie explain, the Queens DA's office has also assisted many survivors vacate criminal convictions. These vacators are absolute lifelines, as convictions often make it difficult for survivors to get jobs or immigration status. By the way, at Sanctuary for Families and at the QFJC, we serve all survivors. That includes everyone, regardless of age, background, gender identity, language skills, to name just a few identities and experiences. In previous years, I've also worked extensively with members of the LGBTQ+ community whose fear and distrust of systems is often made worse by severe homophobia and transphobia. We've helped many transgender survivors of sex trafficking get permanent status, help them vacate convictions, and get name changes. Going back again to the importance of building relationship of trust, this includes collaborating with organizations, working with a specific community. For example, the LGBTQ+ community in Queens, that includes organizations like Voces Latinas, represented today by its amazing executive director, Natalie Rubio-Torrio. There's one collaboration I'm specifically excited to share with you. Last year at Sanctuary, we created the Empower Center, which is a partnership with Health and Hospital Corporation and Gouverneur Hospital, but it's now also expanding to Jacobi Hospital, to assist people in the sex trade access free, high-quality, trauma-informed social, legal, economic empowerment, medical, and mental health services, including also OBGYN and psychiatric services. Services also include extensive, intensive case management. And they're also on-site dental services, also often very sought after. It's an amazing multi-service center that's open to everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, immigration, or documentation status, and health insurance is also not needed. So I'm particularly proud of this initiative. Contact information and referral forms will be included in the chat, I understand, but please do reach out and check it out. I think even if you don't have a client to refer, just try to get a little information. Because it's always good to know where you send your clients before you do actually. So in sum, working together collaboratively and building relationships of trust, we can best assist survivors. So I urge you all to always show up for survivors, to listen to them, to understand them, make connections for them, and help them find the answers they need. This is not a perfect world, but working together collaboratively and in partnerships, as we do here today, there is so much that we can do. Thank you, and I'm also very happy to respond to any questions that may come up.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, we are going to open it up to questions at the conclusion of our last two speakers, to some questions to the panel. Next, I want to introduce Natalie Rubio-Torrio, whom I met at the FJC several years ago, and I had not met her before because her organization isn't directly targeting, or I shouldn't say targeting, but it is not part of it's on an anti-trafficking program. And I heard her speak and I was completely impressed instantly with her organization and the progress they have made in really connecting with people who are either trafficking survivors or trafficking victims or being exploited. And it was very, very impressive. I can't wait for you all to hear from Natalie. She's originally from Peru. She's a founder and executive director of Voces Latinas, which is she's a licensed social worker committed to fighting HIV and violence in the immigrant Latino communities for the past 20 years. For the past 16 years, she has dedicated her time making Voces Latinas a community-driven, culturally responsive agency in Jackson Heights, Queens, serving recent immigrants from Latin America. Much of her work comprises of gaining access and bringing attention to the realities of subpopulations that, due to immigration fears, remain invisible, but yet are at the highest risk for violence and HIV. The programs of Voces Latinas connect these individuals to healthcare and treatment, education about their rights, and safer environments for themselves and their families. Annually, the Voces Latina reaches 8,000 individuals, over 8,000 individuals, and serves over 4,000 through their programs. These are impressive numbers to any service care provider. Thank you, Natalie. And can you please describe a little bit about your experiences and your work at Voces Latinas?
Yes. Thank you, Jessica, and everyone at the District Attorney's Office for the invitation and all the work that you do, but specifically for including us. And an agency, like you said, Jessica, we're not an anti-trafficking agency, but we definitely work closely with partners such as everyone on the panel So just like Jessica said, we are Voces Latinas. We are located in Jackson Heights, Queens, and we target immigrant Latino subpopulations that will typically not seek help or services due to fears around immigration status. Traditionally, our work has been on the ground, going to where the community congregates. And although COVID has disrupted the way we do outreach, it has not completely changed it. We still continue to be on the ground, reaching the most in need. Since 2009, though, we've been reaching, been going into the bars and restaurants along Roosevelt Avenue in Jackson Heights, which many of you are probably familiar. And this is where these bars and restaurants are where immigrant Latinas work as waitresses, bartenders, dancers, and even sex work. This population is somewhat hard to access as it's necessary to gain permission from bar managers and even security guards outside the bars. It's a population that takes time to gain trust. For most Latinas that work in the bars and restaurants, it's not their first choice of work. Due to the economic need, they feel forced to do it. Many are brought here under false pretenses and find themselves forced into sex work, such as becoming trafficking victims, not realizing that they've been trafficked. Many of the women are also professionals, such as doctors, dentists, journalists, and others are in graduate school. Most are mothers, raising families here, but also back home, which their families back home really rely on them for their economic need as well. We gain access to these women by conducting street outreach, by forming partnerships with bar managers, and by recruiting women and training them to be promotoras, which is peers, so that they can learn the resources and share the resources with their other peers in the bars. By using our health lens approach, we are not a threat to bars and restaurants. We offer health screenings and connections to healthcare to everyone. This is from managers to patrons, but with a big focus on women who work in the bars. We want people to come into our organization seeking services, especially health screening such as HIV, and we do even get managers and patrons coming in to get tested. By offering culturally responsive peer training, promotora training, we're providing insight to other work and opportunities to gain skills and do other type of work. But at the same time, we're learning about their circumstances and needs, which is primarily economic and legal, such as immigration, and we're connecting them to those services. Bar work and restaurant work has been an option for undocumented immigrant women for a long time that are new to this country, yet they have very little choice for other kind of work because of documentation status. They're forced to enter in this work in order to survive. The risk for violence and sexual assault increases as their economic need increases. For example, engaging in sex work, drinking with patrons, working late at night, going home alone while intoxicated, being stalked, these things all increase while their economic need also increases. And COVID has more than doubled their need and their risk. Since now restaurants and bars are operating without patrons, many women have lost their jobs. They're resorting to working in brothels, underground brothels, recruiting their own clients and having their personal spaces where inviting their clients to personal spaces, which is even more dangerous and brings more risk for violence and assault to them. In the bars, at least they had the protection of bouncers, while inside the bars, at home and in brothels, they don't have that. Voces Latinas continues to seek out resources and be able to hire women to be essential workers during this hard period of time. And although we provide leadership and training through our Promotora program, what they really need is jobs at the end of the day. None of the women we speak to that do this work chooses to be there. It's not their number one choice. They all say they're forced because they can't find any other kind of work. So what we really need is jobs to be created. We really need an alternative to other work. So there's a need to create jobs, and there's a need for them to, because they want to leave this kind of work yet can't because of their economic need. There's different type of job models such as cooperatives that we have done in the past, and we see that it works for undocumented women and undocumented individuals. And these are the kind of resources we need to get back into our organizations to be able to put women to give women other alternatives to work. I just want to say that I've heard, I read in the chats that if there, who people can report these situations to, if they know of this kind of work or trafficking being done, how is it safe to report it without them being, without people finding out who it is that's doing the reporting? And, you know, I think that this is something that I also ask, because if you are from Jackson Heights, if you do walk along Roosevelt Avenue, we often see many men congregating in the same corners, in the same avenues, just kind of giving out certain information only to men. This could be also in front of massage parlors. But we see it year after year that I believe that the community just becomes kind of just complacent to it. We have heard that people do report or call the police, but then the police come knocking on their door, so then they don't report anymore. So I think this is an area that really needs to be focused in on, and we really need to talk about it and start getting more answers, because when it's brought to the police's attention or to anyone in law enforcement, there is no clear answer. And these are the things that kind of push people away or make people feel like there is no solution, there is nothing that can be done. So I also join those questions that are coming in through the chat about what can people do, who we can call when we're seeing time after time, year after year, the same kind of activity in the same kind of corners. What can be done, or what has been done, or is there anything in the planning to be done? So I just please ask that we continue to report, we continue to ask for help and assistance from all of the agencies that are here on the panel, including the District Attorney's Office, so that we can finally combat this and get to the, I guess, nip it where it begins, where normally it begins. And I know the District Attorney's Office in Queens has a handful of clients and a handful of, much work to do. But if we could also get some answers and some resources, it would really help us to help you in doing your work. So thank you so much again. And I'll be here to answer any questions about the model that we use in our work. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Natalie. You know, we've been working together, especially with your economic empowerment program. But I also would like, thank you for addressing the question about reporting and wanting to feel safe in reporting. I just want to mention, we did put the National Human Trafficking Hotline tip line in the chat, so you can write that down, everyone. It's a confidential reporting hotline, and we are in connection with that, and the Queens District Attorney's Office does get alerted to the anonymous tips that come in through the chat line. So that is one resource that's available. We'll go through some more of the questions later, but thank you so much for your work, Natalie. The amount of reach you do is incredible. We have one last speaker, and I can't believe we're actually running on time. I didn't think this was going to even happen, but Chandra Warwithu. You know, I left her she's left in the itinerary because she's impossible to follow as a speaker. I've heard Sandra speak in the past from a survivor's perspective. But I really, even though I was hearing her speak from a survivor's perspective, a survivor's panel, I didn't realize the amount of work she was doing, her empowerment work. And this fall, ADA, Kiran Shima, and I were having some difficulty finding emergency placement for a victim who had suffered extreme trauma, was being triggered by environments we were trying to place her to, and we were running through our list of partners and resources, and somebody suggested that I call Mentari and gave me Chandra's number, that the director, you know, will get somebody to come. And I did. And shockingly, in the middle of this pandemic, when so many organizations are working remotely, Chandra herself responded to the DA's office, the director of the program, and she met with our victim, with her staff members, and she really immediately connected. And she's fearless. I'm going to read her bio. Her bio is so incredible, I may need to take a water break while I'm reading it. But I will start. Chandra is the founder and CEO of Mentari Human Trafficking Survivor Empowerment Program, Inc. She's a survivor of human trafficking and domestic violence, and now lends her voice in the fight against human trafficking and modern day slavery globally through raising awareness, education, advocacy, legislative lobbying, and empowerment. Chandra holds a bachelor's degree in finance and banking management, and her last position in Indonesia was an international money market trader and manager of the Treasury Department of an international bank. In 2001, Chandra came to the United States for an employment opportunity in one of the major hotels in Chicago. In fact, she was kidnapped, forced, and illegally sold into the underground sex business in New York and surrounded areas. She managed to escape and collaborated with the New York City Police Department to prosecute her traffickers, and Safe Horizon New York assisted her to stay legally in the United States. She found healing after being a victim and began her advocacy work against human trafficking. In 2011, Chandra co-founded a survivor leadership program called Voices of Hope in New York. As a survivor leader, Chandra testified at New York City, New York State, and before the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations Ending Modern Slavery. She gave advice and recommendations to the Senado de la República, Government of Mexico, for human trafficking policies, victim services, and unaccompanied children. She was a consultant for Blue Campaign and an advisor for the OSCE ODIHR for the revision of the National Referral Mechanism Guidebook. As an international woman leader, Chandra represented at the United States Global Exchange Program hosted by Vital Voices and Hilton Worldwide in 2013 to fight human trafficking globally. In 2014, Chandra participated in the first Federal Survivor Forum listening session at the White House, along with 18 survivors of human trafficking. Governor Chris Christie appointed her to be the New York State Commissioner on Human Trafficking for the period of 2013 through 2017. And in 2014, Chandra founded Mentari Human Trafficking Survivor Empowerment Program, a non-for-profit organization to help survivors in their reintegration back into the society independently through the DREAM model: direct services, resources, empowerment, advocacy, and mentorship. In 2015, Chandra established Mentari's Indonesia and distributed educational comic books, Impian Dwi, to educate children about human trafficking, and partnered with local organizations to fight poverty through backyard farming to prevent human trafficking in Indonesia. She raised awareness, and she met more than 25,000 students across Java and Bali. In 2015, Chandra was appointed by former President Barack Obama to be a member of the first United States Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. In 2017, Chandra was invited to be an advisory member to the ODIHR OSCE based in Europe on the Human Trafficking National Referral Mechanism publication. She lectured college students about human trafficking and journalism in specific trauma-informed interviews. She's an expert in trauma-informed services using client-centered approach. As a motivational and inspirational speaker, Chandra spoke at the USLS Humanitarian UK Leadership Symposium in Hanoi, Vietnam. As a leader, she talks about her leadership role at UBAD Writer and Reader Symposium in Bali, Indonesia, and keynote speaker at the Bauer International Model United Nations Conference in Mexico. She was a keynote speaker for a transnational organized crime conference hosted by the Department of State Diplomatic Security in conjunction with Interpol. Chandra was a keynote speaker at the International Symposium in India and established partnerships and collaboration with local organizations to prevent trafficking across the border. She's a member of Alliance 8.7, the working group with the United Nations University and the Why Slavery Ambassador. Chandra lives in Queens, and she is named 2017 National Honoree L'Oreal Women of Worth, and 2020 New York City and State Power Diversity, the most influential 100 Asian Americans in New York politics and policy. Chandra, I'm impressed and exhausted reading your bio. So if you have any energy for us, which I know you always do, can you please share with the attendees your experiences and the work that you do to empower?
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank DA Office Melinda Katz and also Jessica Melton for your outstanding leadership in the fight to eradicate human trafficking, especially in our county. I'm so honored to be a part of this event. All amazing speakers with all the work that you're doing. I was impressed because this is my first time to speak in Queens, in my county, that I live here for the past 19 years. So I'm so happy and excited. But this time I would like to express how important the work that we are doing. Partnership is very important. Collaboration is very important for the sake of victim and survivor. Because we believe we want to promote justice and freedom for all. So Mentari actually is survivor-led organization that based in Astoria. And we have a transitional home in Elmhurst, Queens. And we will open a drop-in center and 2 emergency bed in Astoria by March or April. So that's the update. And our vision is to mentor and empower survivors of human trafficking in their reintegration back into community and society so they can live independently. And the hope is to get rid of its RA of the welfare system. Because of independent, it's very important. So everybody can experience what is fully freedom in our life. So as we promote a survivor like livelihood in our organization, we have our own system that is a community. So direct services, we run survivor and trauma-informed services. We serve any gender and also type of trafficking, but we expand in 2015, become gender-based violence survivor. So not only human trafficking, 85% human trafficking, but the rest is sexual assault, domestic violence. And for human trafficking, we serve 80 to 85% foreign national from 32 different countries. So it's a lot. And we serve 550 over and about 225 graduated from our vocational training in New York. So we have the first in the United States that provide vocational training, culinary art training for survivors using trauma-informed, and 93% employed before the pandemic. So I cannot say anything after the pandemic or during the pandemic, but we changed our program, become online. But for employment, I'm so sorry, I cannot give the data because of it's difficult. It's very difficult for hospitality. And then the resources, we connect with sanctuaries, forests, and many other organizations. And also empowerment, we provide scholarship for people that need help. And advocacy, we seek justice for victims by partnering. And we have a campaigns, policy advocacy in local, state, federal, and international. And also mentorship through accompaniment. So what it's, I think I mentioned our model is dream model that I mentioned and Jessica mentioned, but equality model that we have is very unique because of it is a survivor center. We want to make sure that someone, victim, survivor, receive equal justice. What is the meaning equal justice? We want to make sure that victim receive holistic, comprehensive, trauma-informed services. And equal justice means there will be prosecution on trafficker and also people that abuse them, the sex buyers on the sex trafficking, who abuse physically, mentally, sexually the victim, and to make sure people that involved, third party that involved in the trafficking also addressed and prosecuted. This is the time. We forget, we almost forget. For almost 20 years, we concentrate on trafficker, but we forgot that the abuser, most abuser is with the power is men, mostly, and we let them go. I didn't get equal justice, and I want to change through equality model. And also, if possible, we should promote gender and racial equality, and increasing training to law enforcement to make sure they will practice non-punishment protocol on people that perform commercial sex act, because this is not the choice. Like we mentioned by Natalie, that this is no choice. This is not the choice. And I was born, I wasn't deserved to be a sex slave. I wasn't deserved. But through many different circumstances, and I cannot say a lot of things, but this is what we have to do, is practice non-punishment principle, increasing funding for services for people that perform or involved in commercial sex act, because sometimes those people came from poverty, minority, underserved, and we don't know, and we need to count them in our services. And thank you, Natalie, that you work on it, and also Sanctuary, Caroline, thank you for your work on immigration, and also for immigrant is really important. On prevention, we developed prevention material, so we distributed a Spanish comic book in Queens called Donde Está Dylan. So we partnered with Ghost Vision, and the English version actually published by New York ACS. So if you need to have it, you can contact ACS. This is perfect for students ages young 9 until high school about human trafficking. And we do outreach with feminine hygiene path with the information of identification and human trafficking number hotline, to the brothel, massage parlor, and also community at large. We have specific outreach in Elmhurst. We have more than 11 brothels in Elmhurst alone. And also under the train, 7 train, how many brothels, how many cantina over there. And in Flushing, now Flushing moved from 40th Road to another side, 39th Avenue. So we already identify, and our strategic change because of the pandemic also. So this is how we have to run. We have to be more faster. If they change the technology, the strategy, we have to go over them too. We have to increase our ability to identify. And also, I think we should talk to the Department of Education, how the technology, how the device protect the children from the spam, from the cookies, so they will be safe in education. And thankfully, and also I want to introduce our new prevention in our county. It is supply chains, under supply chains. So we go over to businesses to educate them how they got the material, how they make sure that the company, the small business follow the Department of Education to pay and to treat the employee properly, not to exploit them, and also to make sure that the material is not contain slavery and forced labor, child labor. So this is from me, and I would like to call everybody to partner and to collaborate with us. And I welcome you to reach out and make sure that we are here because we want to make sure justice and freedom for all. And thank you for the DA office. Queens is my favorite county, and to everybody who works so hard for the sake of victim of survivor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm here to respond.
Thank you so much, Chandra. And I agree with everything you said. about the economic empowerment too. We're getting a lot of questions about the economic empowerment because trafficking and exploitation is a monetary driven field. Traffickers are using this as a tool to make money. And the only way we're going to fight it is if we give the people that are exploiting the tools to support themselves in a free and healthy way, not being under the control of a trafficker. So thank you for all getting together on this. We're going to take some questions, but I just want to thank you all for coming together because I think this is really the biggest thing we can do is share our stories and share our resources. And then together we can figure out the best ways to improve our approaches. Because, you know, like you said, the traffickers are always changing it up. We have to be on the same page and we have to keep changing it up. And if we share information, that'll help, you know, we could share information that'll help us do our job better too. So thank you so much. We are going to go to some of the questions in the chat. Some of them we answered already. And some of them I might even follow up with in more depth later on after the call. But we did have a call. We had a question from one of our viewers saying, can you give us signs to help watch for us to identify trafficking victims who may be in need of help? And how do you recommend a bystander to assist? I would like to point out that the district attorney's office, Melinda Katz, had posted up some red flags, but I'm going to share them at this on this call now. In terms of labor trafficking, if you know somebody whose identifications are being withheld by their employer, or they work excessively long or unusual hours, if they're fearful of authorities, if there's evidence of like abuse or malnourishment, or if they're just scared to talk to anybody else but in the little circle they're in. Those are some labor trafficking, and the service care providers on our panel may be able to elaborate in a moment on that and add some additional red flags. I would like to hear what other red flags we should be adding to our list of things to look for. And for sex trafficking, it's often our chronic runaways, people who are not able to make decisions about their own, you know, comings and goings without approval from someone else. We see it often with a very inappropriate, older, intimate partner with children. If you have, you know, somebody that's not in possession of their identification. That's something that Kieran has been working on through this entire pandemic. A lot of our job as prosecutors have been helping and trying to help our trafficking survivors obtain their identification so they can access the services. That is a huge barrier to accessing services. And staying in hotels. Again, the human trafficking number, national hotline number for anonymous reports is in the chat, but also email the Human Trafficking Bureau, call the Human Trafficking Bureau. We want to hear from people. We need to hear what's going on so we can improve our response. Would anybody like to add on to any of the warning signs? No? Okay.
Oh, I think Caroline and I had it. Caroline, you go first.
No, I was going to say very briefly, I think also everybody should know that every encounter you have with an individual could be an opportunity to also unearth some of these issues and someone's victimization. So it could be someone comes in for a prenatal visit. It could be someone goes in for a doctor's appointment. It could be in a school where the conversation is not necessarily about trafficking or someone's experiences, because who really wears that on their sleeve, right? So it is, I think, for everybody also always, like the news that I always spread to, you know, wide audiences, people working in all kinds of different professions and agencies, to really keep this in mind, that everybody you meet with can in fact present like a normal person with no experiences, and we're here just talking, but there could be a whole world of suffering underneath. Because don't forget also, a good trafficker really allows his victim to walk the street and has terrorized the victim without the victim ever disclosing what's going on. So I think be on the lookout for even subtle signs, because with trafficking, you can't really know and learn everything from a list, because the traffickers are always one step ahead.
And I just want to add to what Caroline said about, so something that we've done is we've incorporated certain questions into our assessment, our intake assessment, because sometimes we get cases in that come in as domestic violence, but when you really dig deeper, it isn't domestic violence. It really originated as a trafficker. And so if we don't ask certain specific questions, it just continues to be taken as a domestic violence case. So so that's one of the things that we do is ask more specific questions, and then you start learning, you know, more about their situations. And the other thing about signs, I mean, if you walk down Roosevelt Avenue, I guess you just have to be aware, or maybe in this kind of field. But there are, if you see a group of men, especially congregating in a certain corner, time after time, snowstorm after snowstorm, rain, hurricane, whatever it is, I mean, they're constantly at a corner. It's for a reason. There's also many of the young guys that are also trying to survive, giving out those chica cards, or those cards for massages, or just cards for whatever it is. But it is soliciting. And that's an area too that you want to look at, because that they lead the patron to the home or the brothel, wherever it is that they're gonna the women are at. So it becomes it's just very shady business and very like shady behavior. But that's what's going on, you know. And I think that if people like us are able to identify it and report it, and have, you know, the police kind of get calls after calls of this is happening in our area, maybe, you know, some things will begin or get done. And thank you, Jessica, for the hotline, because we are going to be sharing that.
Thank you, Natalie. And I just want to point out another thing when you talk about the Chica card individuals. It's so hard to penetrate what is going on in that situation. We had a Chica card promoter we had arrested several times. And it turned out he was a victim of labor trafficking. He was being threatened by the gangs to hand out those cards for $20 a day because he owed I guess he was rented a room. They helped him rent a room. So now he owed them, and he was terrified to testify. He basically said, I cannot report this. I'm concerned for my family's safety if they knew I was talking to you. So that's a huge challenge, and why building trust is so important if we're ever going to work together to combat this. I'm looking through the chat. I see AD Chima indicated she'd like to answer a question. Would you like to answer Patty Ann Candy Down's question, Kieran?
Sure.
About how the ADA. Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how does the district attorney's office work with local police, meaning the NYPD, and does our involvement only get started after a trafficker is arrested? We work closely with the NYPD. Sometimes they do undercover operations that result in a trafficker being identified, but we also work with other organizations near and far who report to us about trafficking victims. We receive tips, as Jessica mentioned, through the national tip hotline. We receive other tips, other organizations, and attorneys may contact us and let us know that they know someone who is involved in trafficking and they're not sure what the next steps are. So I would like to point out that we are able to address trafficking even before someone is arrested.
Thank you, Kieran. I'm going to pose one question and I'll answer it, and then I'll see if any of the panelists want to weigh in. Is Queens the most severe human trafficking borough in New York City, since it has the most population diversity in the nation? Is there any correlation between the two? And I think we spoke about that at a little beginning. There is a correlation between the two, because whenever you have diversity and people from different places, you have vulnerabilities. So, which is what traffickers target. So we have 2 international airports. We have a rich culture, but that does lend itself to be a perfect geographical area for trafficking to exist. Would anybody else like to add on to that response? Okay. Are women and children the major target? Are traffickers well organized? Definitely women and children are targets. We believe there are many men and boys and the transgender community that is being targeted, and it's going far underreported. That is a problem. Do our service care providers, who actually have a wider reach of contact, more intimate contact, I should say, with trafficking survivors, do you have anything to add on that question? This I do not know the answer to. We have not had this situation in cases from the DA's office, but maybe the service care provider. So I'm going to pose this question to the panel. Have there been any cases of human trafficking where perpetrators used the K-1 or finance visa?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think, yes, I have seen this too. And both in labor and sex trafficking cases, where you see the visa is just a means to control someone. It's a means to really lure someone to someone else, in this case, like from another country to this country, promising the world. I mean, it's the same model that you see with a lot of people who are promised work in the United States from different countries and then promising a happy marriage. It's the internet bride. So I think, yes, we've seen that. A lot of those situations, the victim, you tend to think that is just the wife of someone who is a US citizen or a green card holder. So is it domestic violence? But it's in fact a form of labor trafficking. And if there's also pimping out of the spouse to others, could also be a case of sex trafficking, even though it's basically all in the marriage.
I want to add a little bit, Jessica,
Yeah, go ahead.
for that K-1 visa. We identify in our organization, we serve a few of survivors that came using K-1 visa. And the fact the people that promote or sponsor actually the trafficker. And then they just lock the girl and become like a sex slave. And one particular from Philippines that we identify and we help the victim, they brought using a K-1 and another one is using J-1 visa to the location in San Francisco. I forgot. Auckland. So there is a baby farm over there. So those women brought to Auckland and they were locked and just to have a baby. And then she escaped. So this is just additional cases that include K-1 and J-1 visa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. We have a question, and it's one that just came in, but I'm going to pose it because it actually touches on something I've been trying to work more on. Does your office work with trained pastors or other forms of religious leaders? Because of cultures, some victims will go there first, which can serve as a liaison. I just attended a training on faith-based responses to human trafficking and how churches can work together with authorities. And we are looking to expand to that area. That would be, churches are sometimes on the front lines, and they, like you said, they do have trust with the community, and at least to work with churches to connect them to the appropriate services. So we want to increase that outreach, and I would welcome anyone to email the Human Trafficking Bureau or call. We will send someone to come speak. We will do a virtual appearance. We are trying to get out as much as we can. COVID has inhibited a lot of our outreach efforts that we had hoped for this year, but we're virtually appearing and we are available, and that is a very good suggestion. Does anybody else have anything to add on the faith-based question? I want to, a question from Hassan King. Hello, Mr. King. Oh, go ahead, Sandra.
Yes, for the faith-based, we have a specific training, and it is available in all the borough under Raven skill. You can go to nomwi.org, and I will put in the chat. And another one is Let My People Go, that specific work on a faith-based, how to train pastor or other member like deacon or community at large to be able to identify. And we partner with City Mission, that one of the member of the City Mission called me for a potential victim that we serve some of them. It's very good on the approach. So I will put in the chat the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. And we did get a question about whether or not the information in the chat can be disseminated. We're going to see, unfortunately, technical skills are not my expertise, but the DA has hired incredible technical experts, which I'm sure can extract the information that we've provided. We have all your email addresses of the registrants, and we can circulate that. And surely, if you need any of these resources, you can email or call the Human Trafficking Bureau, and we'll make sure that you get that. We have a question. We have 5 minutes. We're going to try to get a few more. And if not, I will try to respond to these questions privately after the conversation, or connect you with the people that can most appropriately answer the question. Mr. King, with respect to victims who not self-identify as a trafficking victim, I presume, due to emotional connection, do you have any resources available that can help advocates be equipped with media or tools or soft questions? There are many trainings that we go on, even as assistant district attorneys, on trauma-based interviewing. So any trauma-based interviewing classes you can take, definitely asking questions in a non-judgmental way. Trafficking survivors are basically trained to be ashamed of what they've done, and that's how control is maintained. So being non-judgmental is the greatest approach, but I'm not the expert. Do any of the service care providers have any resources that Mr. King can go to? I recently met Mr. King, and I actually am looking forward to working more in the future, with him in his anti-trafficking work. Are there any resources that the service care providers can connect Mr. King to in best practices for trauma-based interviewing? If not, I will include you in our training email list in the Bureau, Mr. King. And
Jessica, you can also connect me as well. So
okay.
We can add anyone onto our listserv of training opportunities.
Okay, that's good. I'll make that introduction between Mr. King and the Family Justice Center resources. We have a question from Mr. Block. Thank you to the Queens DA panel for hosting this issue. If a brothel is raided in NYPD, does the Queens DA prosecute the Johns when they're arrested? It depends if we can prove patronizing a person for prostitution. The Human Trafficking Bureau handles all felony level buyers of sex, so that any buyers of sex of underage girl, but our Criminal Court Bureau handles the patronizing a person for prostitution arrests, and they evaluate them on a case-by-case basis on whether or not we can prove that. We would need somehow evidence of the agreement, because it's the agreement is the crime. So we would need either the person who agreed with the patronizer to testify, or a police officer or bystander overhearing the agreement for us to legally charge patronizing during the brothels. Question from Jack Lamb: where do traffickers find their victims? Broken homes, bus depots, train stations? Mr. Lamb, anywhere. Many traffickers know their trafficking victims. Anyway, does anybody else have anything to add on that? All of those places and more. That's my answer.
Besides the internet that I talked about earlier, I've encountered situations where traffickers have met younger victims through other victims that they're already trafficking. So what they do is they'll use some of their current trafficking victims to sort of recruit newer victims.
Thank you, Kieran. Ms. Bazell, you issued a question. Of course, this is not a subject that can be answered easily directly, and that's why we're starting the conversation, but that anyone in society can be blackmailed and targeted. And I think that was a huge takeaway from this whole panel, is this could happen to anybody, just like intimate partner violence. It's not something that is just that certain members of our society vulnerabilities are triggered, but vulnerabilities come from a variety of reasons. It could be emotional vulnerabilities. It could be economic. Mr. Natalie?
Yeah, I wanted to give an example of us in our, once we had, we do HIV testing in the van, and we had a young man from Mexico come in, but he came in with his boss, Chinese man, non-English speaking, and that was his boss. So they just closed up the business and came, I guess we're walking down Roosevelt Avenue, saw our van, and both wanted to get tested. We couldn't test the boss because he didn't speak Spanish nor English. But in the testing, in testing the young man through the questions, we learned that, I mean, first of all, the young man learned Chinese. I mean, that's very hard. The man learned Chinese so that he could communicate well with his boss. But we learned in our through our assessment that he would close with the boss and was paid more to have sex. And so again, not his choice, but because of economic need and because of that, you know, getting paid more to wait to close and then go and have sex is just is what you know, what is that? How is that defined? So these are certain situations that many people are in, and most people are in it that because they don't feel they have other resources or other kind of work options. But that was a male, and that we see, it does exist often.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it is 5 o'clock, so we do have to wrap up this call now. And I know there's a handful of questions we did not get to. I'll ask you if you want any of this information to reach out to me directly at human trafficking at queensda.org, and we will get you any information, and we could even talk about your questions. One moment. So thank you for all the people that spoke during this panel. I honestly envisioned this when I envisioned our first awareness panel. I envisioned it being in person. Imagine how great that would have been with this amazing group of women to get together in person. We would have had a lot more interaction with you all attendees. But the good news is we probably got our scope out wider than we would have had if we hadn't done this this way. Thank you for all of the amazing experts that spoke. You gave us so much information on what to look for in to help us in the fight against trafficking. I'd just like to reiterate to the attendees that there are a number of resources available in the chat, and I urge anybody who's a victim of any suspicious activity or you want to be connected to service, just contact the Human Trafficking Bureau. If there's a survivor listening or someone who knows a survivor, you are not alone. We can help regardless of immigration or any other legal status. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good night, and I hope we all can get together very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.